People who were in a coma, what made you fucking crazy when you woke up? In the 90s, my great-grandfather had a stroke. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he woke up, he couldn't speak English. He could only speak Choctaw. He had learned it as a child because his family lived near the Choctaw Reserve, and he played with many local children. He was fluent in the language at the time, but he forgot it during his lifetime, and by this time, he could not remember a single word. This lasted about 10 days, and then he woke up from a nightmare and understood that he could speak only English again, with no knowledge of a single word in Choctaw. He could also repeat every conversation that was going on in the room while he was in the coma. Whoa, our brains are truly amazing. If I'm not mistaken, there's a guy who started speaking Cantonese after his coma and ended up hooking up with a Chinese woman. I was in a coma for 4 days. When I woke up, everyone around me were discussing some kind of baby of mine. I'd lost long-term memory and couldn't even remember I was pregnant. My son was in the children's hospital in the neonatal intensive care unit. I gave birth to him by C-section at 29 weeks. It was all related to Crohn's disease. I found out about it after I woke up. I had a ruptured colon during my pregnancy. My husband said I was talking like a baby when I first woke up. I felt very tired, and for the next few days I was still a little anxious. I remember one conversation my mother had with a nurse while I was in a layup. And after a couple of days, my long-term memory came back to me, and I remembered everything up to and including my second surgery. My son wasn't born until my third surgery. My son was what surprised me. Is your son okay? Yes, he weighed 3.2 pounds, and now he's 18 years old and 6'5" tall. Thank you for asking. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator. When I was disconnected, my body didn't remember how to breathe on its own. I literally had to learn how to do it all over again. It took me a few days. I had no natural sense of how long or deep to inhale, how long to hold the air, and how long to exhale. I had to direct all my concentration on my breathing. It was really scary. For all the people who were wondering how I slept, I didn't sleep for the first couple of days. If I dozed off, my oxygen sensor would start beeping and wake me up, and then the nurse would yell at me across the ICU to remember to breathe. I couldn't talk because I had tubes in my nose and throat, but I remember waking up one day very tired to that damn beeping. Anyway, I started concentrating on breathing again, but it really pissed me off. My nurse would run up and yell at me to breathe. I looked at her and yelled in my absent voice, "Yes, breathing." She must have read my lips and felt indignation because she just held up her hands and said, Okay, good job," and then walked away. Anyway, shared it because I had never had that opportunity before. My ability to breathe normally came back to me after a month or so. My health is alright now, so I wouldn't say it's affected me in any way permanently. Oh thanks, now I'm watching my every breath. Don't forget to blink. Asshole! You ruined the next 30 minutes of my life! My mother was in an induced coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she thought the hospital was trying to kill her. She tried to get out of bed and fell to the floor because she couldn't walk. Mostly, she was frightened that her legs were out of shape. She had to relearn how to control every muscle. She couldn't speak properly at all and had lost the ability to write. After retraining, her handwriting was different. She said she hated how perfect her hands looked. Her nails and cuticles were perfect and clean from not being used in any way. I remember trying to brush her hair after she woke up. Almost all of it had fallen out. She almost died every day she was in a coma. She had sepsis after diverticulitis, after a botched surgery. Most of her hair grew back and she was able to walk, but she has brain damage, which makes her look very drunk. She's always getting dizzy. But it's been 5 years and her recovery can be called a miracle. A good friend of our family fell into a coma for 6 months. Eventually, when he woke up, he freaked out that his wife looked so old. In fact, he lost the last 15 years from his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies and he didn't even know about his 3rd child. The memory never came back. He jumped from no cell phones to smartphones and laptops. Everything was new to him. Stuck in the early 90s, but actually being in the 2000s, he had a lot to learn. But learning that you forgot your children's growing up moments was the hardest part for him. This is the saddest story I've seen in this thread. Oh my goodness, that's creepy. He must have felt it was punishment for something terrible. My wife was in an induced coma for 2 weeks for medical reasons. When she woke up, she had false memories. They were all based on conversations that were going on in her room. For example, she thought they had flown to Washington, D.C. for treatment. While she was in a coma, my father was talking about how he had just returned from a work trip to Washington. Somehow she overheard it while she was passed out and her brain interpreted it to mean that she was the one who flew to D.C. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with the reality. My brother-in-law had a brain tumor, so he was out for a while when he was first brought to the hospital. The nurses were Asian, so when he woke up, he apologized to people for making them come to Japan to see him. My stepfather was in a coma for about 3 weeks. When he woke up, he couldn't find his teeth. We completely forgot where he put them and searched for a whole week. At one point, he dropped dead at the hospital sink, out of the blue. They resuscitated him, but they couldn't figure out why he could barely breathe. Then the doctors sat us down and showed us the x-rays with the false teeth inside. They forgot to take them out when they put the tubes in his mouth, which caused them to cut off his air supply or something like that. So yeah, we found them. Since this has raised so much interest, I thought I'd post a picture, the only one I have on my old cell phone. I hope the link works. Here's the photo. Oh shit! Tell me about it. I haven't seen a BlackBerry in years. I was in a coma for 4 days from bacterial meningitis. When I woke up, I was completely deaf. I had to communicate with my parents and doctors with a notebook and a pen. Somehow, my hearing gradually returned to my left ear, but my right ear is still 100% deaf to this day. Yo! Someone else who had bacterial meningitis! I'm so glad you survived. Trust me, it could have been so much worse. Thanks, man. I'm glad I made it too. The doctors gave me a 10% chance at life. Glad you made it too. Talking to my mother, she said the doctors only gave me a 5% chance of surviving. Fuck you. My wife was in a medically induced coma for 4 days. She had a reaction to the contrast dye and her heart stopped for 20 minutes. For almost 3 months, she communicated with her long-dead parents. She talked about them as if they were in the next room, or she would say her daughter or brother called her, but they didn't. She kept thinking her mother and father were alive. It drove me crazy to have to gently correct her many times in a day. She made up amazing tales of what people, relatives, friends, neighbors, were doing, what they were telling. Really creative fiction. After 3 months, she started to come around. The confabulation stopped. Things have changed. She can remember recent events, but her old memories are gone. I don't know what it feels like, but it must be awful. Sometimes she cries over lost memories, but overall she's doing very well. My father had a reaction to contrast dye after a head injury. There were seizures, and it was like a brain reset. He could only utter, "How's the girl?" My sister had just been born then. He couldn't hold things or grab things. Spent several months in therapy. Eventually his mood changed. He became very testy, a little patient, and very sleepy. He's fine now, except for some pain in his neck. About 20 years ago, my cousin suffered a serious head injury after a fall. He was about 20 years old at the time. He was in a coma for almost 4 weeks. When he woke up, he discovered quite quickly that he had an eidetic memory. He could retell any conversation word for word and even tell you the date and time you said something. He could also memorize images in just a few seconds. His memory is still eidetic. It's friggin' annoying. Whenever he reminds me of something I've said in the past, usually something I can't even remember, I offer to smack him over the head again. Looking at what happened the last time he got hit in the head, he'll probably just get another superpower. Better not risk trying to fix him. Nah, it just doesn't work correctly. He needs to be turned off and on again. DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, sent me into a coma. I have vague memories of being sick. The general sense of time was just like mush. Even years later, I can't establish a proper timeline. I have flashes of memories of different doctors coming in and out of the room. Once I came out of the coma, I was still out of it. When you're on an insulin drip, the doctors check your sugar every hour. I could never get to sleep, but the whole time I felt asleep, it's hard to describe the feeling. Just mushy, dragging time. I was in a coma for almost 6 weeks. When I woke up, I had to learn everything again. I still had most of my speech ability, but my motor skills were terrible. I had to learn how to wipe my butt and how to go up and down stairs. It took about 3 weeks. I also lost a shit ton of weight. I was 5'10" and weighed about 65 pounds. 6 weeks? Jesus Christ! Severe head trauma, after which I had an MRI with a dye that I was severely allergic to. I died on the table within minutes. My nephew, 14 years old, was in a medically induced coma for more than 3 months. He lost about 30% of his body weight because his muscles atrophied. His first point when he saw himself for the first time was, "Did you forget to feed me?" That was incredibly hard to hear with his family there and cried near his bed the entire time he was unconscious. I was in a coma for 3 weeks from September 2nd to 26, 2001. I was driving through Pennsylvania on my way to Ithaca to meet with the marketing manager of the company I was working with at the time. I made this trip on September 2nd, 2001, and I don't remember very well what happened, except for what the medics and hospital staff told me. But the gist is that I was hit or run off the road by a drunk driver trying to cross 3 lanes to get to the exit where I was. Basically ended up in his blind spot at the wrong time, in addition to the fact that he was drunk as shit. Pretty much everyone here can guess what happened on September 11th, 2001. It feels like I teleported or time traveled, because one minute I'm driving and the next I'm smashed in blood. I'm in a hospital bed with a staple in my back and neck, airbag gas burns, an IV in my arm, and a few other minor injuries. When I woke up, I was in a completely different world than the one I had left behind. Before I fell asleep, the economy was fine. Overall, the world was cool. And then I woke up. Chaos. That's all there was then. Thank you so much for watching. You can leave a comment telling us if you were in a coma, what the hell you were freaking out about when you woke up. Also, don't forget to watch other videos from our channel.